At HarperCollins India, we believe in the power of words and stories and what it takes to tell them. From our breakout new debut voices, learn about how they wrote their books and how you can write your own. Sohini Chattopadhyay, Kunal Purohit, Radhika Iyengar, and Zeyad M. Khan join our associate publisher at HarperCollins India, Swati Chopra, in conversation.
Welcome, everyone. Today is World Book Day, and delighted to be here with the Dynamic Debuts session, which is our authors whose debut books we published in the past year. Delighted to welcome on board Sohini Chattopadhyay, author of The Day I Became a Runner, Kunal Purohit, author of Edge Pop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars, Radhika Iyengar, author of Fire on the Ganges, and Zeyad Masroor Khan, author of City on Fire. Welcome you all, and let's begin. I just thought we could start with each one of us, each one of you giving a short introduction of your book and telling us why you wrote it. Sohini, would you like to start us off, please?
Thank you, Swati, and happy World Book Day to you and to everybody watching. Such a great idea. My book is called The Day I Became a Runner, a women's history of India through the lens of sport. What I try to do in the book is to offer that my ambition is to offer an alternative history of independent India through the lives of 9 women athletes, all of them runners. And so I travel from the late 1930s to the current moment through the lives of these women. And there's also a bit of me in the book. So I'm unlike any of the runners I've profiled. I'm a hobby runner, but that was sort of my entry into the book, and that's the way I have structured the book. So my running is not as important as my views on and my sort of thoughts on the world around while I tell the stories of these women.
Thanks, Sohini. And Kunal, would you like to take on the baton now and tell us about your book? Of course, it's got a lot of attention since it released, still going strong. Please tell us why you wrote it.
Thank you, Swati. And I mean, it's a fabulous day for all of us to gather here and then talk about our own sort of debut books and the process that we've sort of all seen through. In terms of my book, for a few years now, we've seen how the country's political discourse has altered rather dramatically. Where we are now seeing that sort of our religious identities are becoming more and more pronounced in a way that we're now sort of mainstreaming a lot of hate, sort of lot of polarization on the basis of our religious identity. And it's in this context that I started traveling in 2018, to sites where there had been violence on the basis of people's religious identities. So violence especially against Muslims, but sometimes also against Christians and Dalits. And in the process of sort of traveling to all of these places, I kept wondering, how is it that we got here? How is it that we got to a point where it felt okay, it felt mainstream to be sort of spewing venom on each other's communities, on targeting one community solely and solely because of their religious identity. And I think in trying to sort of find answers to some of these questions, a small effort of it came in the form of understanding how popular culture has done this, right? Where popular culture has sort of very neatly packaged Hindutva and very hardline Hindutva into easily digestible, bite-sized political propaganda. And then my book looks at 3 different popular culture forms. It looks at poetry, it looks at music, and it looks at publishing. And in all 3 forms, what I found over 4 years is how there had been a weaponization of all of these forms of popular culture in a way that you could be entertained while you're listening to the song, while you're consuming poetry, or while you're reading a book. But in essence, what you're consuming is hardline political propaganda, which is only and only furthering, sort of Islamophobia, which is only attacking, especially Muslims, but also critics of the government. And it's essentially that is what has also caused us to reach this point where now we're seeing that this everyday form of communalization is making a mob of people with no political history at all. So they don't need to be political workers for them to now be consumed by this rhetoric and for them to act on the rhetoric. So that's essentially, the world of Hindutva pop, as I call it. And in terms of the format, I've followed three people: one poet, one singer, and one book publisher, and I've sort of seen through their journeys for 4 years now.
Thanks, Kunal. Zeyad, would you like to take the thread up? Because I must say, I read a very early draft of your book, and it's such a hard-hitting, chilling narrative. So, would you like to say something about the book and why you wrote it?
Uh, Thank you, Swati, and thank you, everyone. City on Fire, A Boyhood in Aligarh. It's a coming of age memoir. It's a very simple book. But like the times are different. So like it is set in a time when the post Babri riots were a part of our lives. So Aligarh, uh, at that point, Aligarh had riots like every year. Like they came like seasons, they went away like seasons. And my home was also at a strange place. So it is like my home was at the cusp of two ghettos. Like one was a Hindu area and one was a Muslim area on the top of it. So my home was the border of these two areas during very politically charged times. So I write in this book. It's a memoir of growing up, seeing how the violence became so normalized in my community, in my ghetto, and how people started taking it so easily. It became so much part of our life that we began to dehumanize the people around us. Okay, like somebody has died. It did not wasn't such a big deal, something which I am seeing right now in the country as well. So like when there is so much violence around you, the violence sort of become very, very normalized and people started accepting it. Oh, it's just another thing. So I try to decipher what happened in my neighborhood through my own story, through the story of my family, and through the story of my neighbors, some of the people who died in those riots. So I went to their families, I talked to them and try to reconstruct their lives, and not only how they were in their death, how they were in their lives as well. So that is, it was also, the book also covers my relationship with my father, who was sort of a, let's say, comparatively more liberal than me. As anybody in the book will find out, was a very, very communal, religiously polarized kid who was very, very afraid of venturing into the Hindu area. Like I used to think if I go there, somebody will, kidnap me or hurt me. I was very, very, like, because the setting was such, I had seen riots and everybody around me was warning me, you shouldn't go into Hindu areas. But I fell in love with something very, very simple, comic books. So I was as a 4 year old, I used to go to Hindu area to buy comic books because Muslims were not selling comic books, and that became my door to the world of, and my comic book wala was a very, very nice person. He was a very, very gentle person, so he became my door to understanding what whom I perceive the other. So this is me trying to understand my neighborhood, the religious division, and my own self and my own relationship with my family. So this is what the book is about, and it tries to understand my city, Aligarh, in all its different nuances.
Thanks, Yad. Radhika, your book, Fire on the Ganges, is also about understanding a community who lives in an ancient city as well, in Banaras, the domes. And please tell us why you wrote about them.
Thanks, Swati. So the book about the domes are a small marginalized community, a Dalit subcaste in Banaras, and they have been designated by society and tradition and religion to cremate the dead. And what took me on this journey to report on them. It began as a student project. And I'd read about the Dome community in passing in an article, and I just got I was very intrigued. And I was quite taken aback by the fact that I had no understanding or knowledge of this particular community that plays an important role in performing, Hindu last rites. And at the same time, I was uninformed about the existence of this community that does this very specialized work. So I really wanted to know more about them. So my curiosity became my guiding light in one sense. And then when I started researching, I realized that the Dome community are practically quite invisible in mainstream conversations in mainstream media. And I looked into academic literature and found that even though there have been descriptions about the Dome community, it's very limiting. They have a very unidimensional representation in those literature books. And it's everything is related to their work at the cremation ground. There's nothing very much detailing about their lives beyond the cremation ground, about the men, about the children, about the women. And I wondered why that was the reason. And I just wanted to go in depth and do a proper reporting on the community to document their stories. So in a nutshell, that is why I began writing the book.
Thanks, Radhika. I think we've had a wonderful round where all of you have talked about why you wrote your books. But as we know, good nonfiction writing is the research bit is sort of it's such a crucial part of the book. So I was wondering if you all could, and Sohini, let's start with you. If we could all look at what in the research process, whether during the interviews you did, or the profiles of the runners, writing them, getting the information, what was for you the toughest bit?
But first let me just thank all the others, my co-debutants, for it was very, very good listening to each one of you. And I feel like all of them are, in a way, all of us have tried to do an India book in a way, like understanding India through a particular lens. Coming to what was most difficult, so I would say there are two things in the research process. In the beginning, it was difficult for me to figure, because these were women who were not well known at all, other than Usha. So I begin in the late 1930s, and so there's Mary D'Souza, part of the first Indian Olympic team that sends women. So in the beginning, I struggled to, because I got hints from the internet, but then I wasn't able to, find out more than a couple of blogs or a newspaper article. But I had this brainwave, and it's not really, it's quite normal as an idea, but it was a very, very, very rich ground for research, is that I thought I would go and use the newspaper archives of the National Library. And that is where, the National Library has newspaper archives for maybe almost 200 years. So, the newspapers of the 1920s to the 1970s are in terrible, terrible condition, because I think Ram Guha says this, that from the 1920s to the 1950s is the most studied period in Indian history, because of Gandhi and then the national movement. So that once I had that, my research process became relatively easy in terms of the larger idea that I had, that I want to tell a story of India through these women. But the second part, which is that telling the stories of the women, interviewing them, was difficult because sports people are not naturally articulate in words. They, as I say, articulate with their bodies. So it was difficult for me to convey. And also, other than Usha and Bhuti, most of them had not been written about. So they kept asking me, what is it? So they were dismissing their own stories in a sense. They didn't think it was important enough to be told. So just drawing those stories out was difficult. And in the writing process, also, I had some difficulty.
What difficulty would you like to just very quickly say in the writing process?
I mean, this ambition that I had, that I want to tell a story of India through these. So it's a nice little, neat little thing to write on a proposal or to have as an idea. But it's actually, I found difficult to, link it. I didn't want the book to read like separate profiles, like a set of profiles. I mean, that is my attempt. I don't know how far I've succeeded, but I wanted a narrative, an arc.
No, I think the book does succeed in that, even if I say so myself, that, it does sort of very successfully create a very cohesive narrative and with such disparate characters. But Kunal, coming to you, yeah. Kunal, in terms of your work on edge pop, Hindutva pop, there were long periods of time where you were in contact with each of your subjects and you were interviewing them, you were shadowing them, you were visiting them, spending time with them. So what during that process, the research process, what was it for you that was particularly challenging?
So, Swati, I mean, I was very clear early on that, I wanted this story to be told through my characters. I didn't want this to be a book where I would go forth with my opinion on what this, world of Hindutva pop looked like, or, what its people, were sort of doing, what their motivations were. I wanted the story to be told through all of these characters and in a way where it's deeply researched, where I sort of travel back with them into their early childhoods as well, which is something that I very consciously did with all of them. Now, to do everything that I mentioned would obviously take enormous amount of time and an enormous sense of trust in each other, right? So I think early on that sort of was an issue because the access, it's easy to get their numbers, it's easy to call them up, but I think all of them had sort of this very suspicious thought about why an English language journalist wanted to, be with them. Why did I want to shadow them? Why did I want to travel back with them to their villages? So just establishing that relationship was a challenge of its own because again they had all of these sort of three principal characters were people who had never been interviewed by anyone from an English language newspaper, leave alone a book. So they had not been used to receiving attention from this particular section of the media. So I think that sort of to overcome the suspicion was paramount to the process. But and then you sort of go on and to be able to keep your distance from these characters and from their work, and yet sort of see them in a human way, right? See them as people like you and me with possibly different ways of getting there, but essentially having very similar ambitions, very similar desires, sometimes very similar fears. So to be able to strike that balance sometimes was tough because, to be honest, to consume all of this, pop culture content that they were churning out was it can be emotionally quite draining. Because what you're consuming, what you're constantly consuming, is essentially sort of this rhetoric targeted at Muslims, calling for violence against them, insinuating all kinds of motives and conspiracies around them. So to be able to consume that and then go back to the same people and then to sort of see them in an as objective a manner as possible could sometimes be challenging, but I was very certain that I didn't want that to interfere with my reporting at all. So yeah, I mean, these were some of the challenges I thought I faced during the book.
Yeah, and Ziyad, did you also, feel something similar? Because for you, it was a personal endeavor. You're writing, in a way, your own memoir while looking at the memoir of your city also in a way. And it was a very personal exercise, I imagine. So how difficult, how emotionally challenging was it for you to do that?
It was like very, very traumatic, truth be told. So, like, revisiting parts of your past is always very, very traumatic. But, like, one of the challenges was to, to reach out to the families of the victims and try to talk to them about somebody who had passed a decade back, and somebody they don't want to talk about. Somebody, like when somebody in your family dies, you try to somehow people go into that stage that they don't talk about that person anymore. That person becomes like an elephant in the room that they with whose memory they don't want to engage with. So in that way, going back to these people and talking to them about like somebody who died like 15 years ago, a family member, a closed one, that was felt a little too intrusive, but I thought that I had to do it and I did it. But it was beautiful also at the same time because I think it also I hadn't like they also felt good because talking to something which they hadn't talked about for a long time. And at the same time because like for even for trying to understand my own family, so I narrate my interpretations of my mother, my father with whom I had a troubled relationship, and my brother with who was a bully who used to beat me once in a while, as is evident in the book. So like, and those things like trying to remove myself from just being a person and try to also see those things from their point of views. So i so i could not be like if I'm writing a draft, so I could not be unfair to anybody, even my neighbors, even the people, even my Hindu neighbors in those times with whom so one of them even tried to kill me once. Okay, so I had to be fair to like one of the people, one of my neighbors, Hindu neighbors, he once pointed me during a mob attack that he's a Muslim, and I do remember he's a neighborhood person with whom I buy groceries from. So in some ways, I don't know, like I had to understand his motivation, why he was there, and why he probably in that heat of the moment pointed me out. So I have to, and even my relationship with my father, who was very, very afraid that I was becoming too religious. I was a part of the Tablighi Jamaat, and I was a very religious kid. I used to preach from the podium, like, and my father was very afraid, like these things, like being so religiously inclined, will probably put me in trouble or like will be problematic for me as a Muslim in the future. And he, like, and so I had a fight. So recollecting all of those things in which I had been unfair to other people on my own accord and trying to, reason that out. And then in the form of a text, that was pretty challenging, like traumatic. And like even like just sitting down and trying to understand the past, like recounting all those memories. The worst part was probably like thinking of things that I did not wanted to think, and sitting and remembering the thing about my father or my brother, and how it happened and how did I see it, and now how was it probably in real life, things like that. Like violence, I don't know, like trying to understand the violence was, like in fact it wasn't that traumatic because the Delhi riots had just happened, So I was already in that state. I was trying to understand, like all of the writers and journalists were trying to understand the history, and their idea of India through their own viewpoints. All of us. So I was also trying to understand that violence, and that kind of helped me understand the violence that I faced as a child. So that was, I think, trying to see the violence that is happening in India as something very parallel to what happened in Aligarh in the 1990s. I do think uh, that was pretty challenging, but at the same time trying to decipher the Delhi riots, something which is happening in contemporary India, and writing about that, and without uh, you know some I talk about some very, very things like being a part of the Tablighi Jamaat, writing about Osama bin Laden in a school essay and all of those things. So I had to not sound bitter as well.
Hmm.
I had to somehow, when you write as a Muslim, you also have to think about what the repercussions of the text might be on the people. So in that way, uh, I try to understand the violence not from a bitter point of view, but from a point of view of a person, Indian, who is worried about what is happening in the country, and uh, and I
Yeah.
think that's what the idea was about.
Yeah, thanks, Yad. I think one of the common points that are emerging across experiences, this whole practice of almost radical empathy, where, in order to understand the other, we sort of look at our own experiences and try and deal with them in such a way that we are able to understand the other without bitterness, as you said. Radhika, in your experience, was that also one of the things that of course, you did in a different way in order to empathize and to really understand a community whose experiences are so different from yours? What were the challenges there, as you went in? Because you also managed to, get so many people to open up to you about their personal lives, their personal experiences, the experiences of their families, of things that had happened to them. So what was it all like, and how challenging was it?
Thanks, Swati. Yes, it was definitely quite challenging. I think just for me to build a relationship with them, and I wanted to build a relationship which was strong and which was very authentic and sincere, because and you know, like Kunal also mentioned, like if you're an outsider, if you're not from the community, people will look at you suspiciously. People will be wary of you, and understandably so. And for me, like I really wanted the community members and me to reach a place of mutual trust and understanding, especially for them, where they felt secure enough to speak to me and open their worlds to me. So that took a while. And I think what really helped was that I wasn't someone who would, who would just go for a day or two and then just disappear. I kept returning to the neighborhood. I spent a lot of time with them, just watching the women cook, or just having tea with them and just sitting and understanding their lives. And they would talk to me and they would just open up. I think they, as human beings, we are very perceptive, and I think they also understood that I was genuinely curious about their lives, and I genuinely wanted to learn more about them. And so that really helped a lot. And when it came to writing, I think I was acutely aware of my privileged caste and class, and I was very careful of the way I was telling their stories, not my story. It's their story, so I had to be very, very, very careful, very honest in the way I was telling their stories. So. Sometimes sometimes I would like erase a lot of things. I would write down, and I just didn't want things to be misconstrued by readers, because when you're writing about such a sensitive um, subject, about a community which has been invisibilized by Hindu society in so many ways, you have to be very, very responsible in the way you write and tell their stories. So for me, it was quite a task, but I'm happy, the way everything came together, because at the end of the day, their narratives are very important to compile and document and put together. So and also when it came to reporting, there were times where the corpse burners initially, the men, they were not very open to talking to me. And like I mentioned, because I was an outsider, and also because I am a woman, and it's a very conservative community, so they're not used to women approaching them and having conversations with them. So it took time to really establish a rapport with them, and that's how things, the friendship and the bonds were made.
That's very interesting. I think we have a little more time. So, because it's World Book Day, I'm wondering if we should end with, one book that each one of you would like to just say a couple of sentences about that has deeply impacted either your worldview or your writing or so go. Favorite books, Sohini.
Do you mean this is such a difficult question?
I know.
Very
And
difficult
I'm
question.
always first. Anyway,
Yeah.
You're
you mean
first. You're number
I
one.
can go first. I can go first.
Okay,
Sohini, for
Zeyad,
once.
please go ahead.
Like to take the burden of Sohini. Um,
thank you.
because so like I think I'll because of course it's a very difficult question that to pick up
Oh,
a
I'm
favorite
sorry.
book because think of something because a lot of books inspire your writings in many ways, even reading academic like a Michel Foucault. I read Michel Foucault a lot to understand the how the system and like, but I will talk if I have to, there's one book that really impacted my book particularly. It is by a feminist writer called Vivian Gornick. Her book called Fierce Attachments. This woman, she writes about growing up in a suburban America, and hearing stories about women from women, and how all of those stories affected her life and her relationship with her mother. And she writes beautifully. She writes beautifully. She writes like, you just want to keep reading her. Like she's telling a very simple story, but she is so beautiful in the understanding of other people's emotion and the way she writes. So whenever I wanted to find inspiration to write something about, and there were so many times, and I think others will also attest, when you writing a book is such a long process, there will be many times you would want inspiration from. So I used to save that book to find inspiration at the right time. So that will be
That's your
Fierce
book.
Attachments, Vivian Gornick, to give me inspiration at the right time.
Thanks, Ziyad. Who would like to go next? Because I don't want to put any pressure, but anybody who would like to.
I can just
Yeah.
add to what Ziyad is saying that, yeah, I mean, when you're writing a book, for me also, Catherine Boo's Behind Beautiful Forevers was a big source of inspiration in terms of how to structure, how to write about different individuals and be strong in terms, like, sorry, be true to their stories and build up their stories in such a way that it's engaging to the readers at the same time. So I used to, pencil in and underline a lot of sentences, and I have these bookmarks and different pages. So completely agree with Zeyad when it comes to writing, especially for your debut book. You try to look at bigger, better writers who are veterans in the field, and yeah.
Thanks,
Gosh,
Radhika.
that was going to be my recommendation, by the way.
Okay.
But I had another book which I mean it's not my favorite book or whatever, but I think it's a book that does similar work in terms of what I have done, which is the Anatomy of Hate by Revati Lal, right? Just the reporting process that she follows, and I think essentially what you spoke about, Swati, this sort of radical empathy for people whose work, whose ideologies, whose worldviews you can't possibly stand, you can't see eye to eye with, and yet be able to actually be compassionate towards them. And then in the process of understanding them better, understanding their motivations better. I think that book does such a fantastic job of it. So if there's anybody who's not read it, I would seriously recommend.
Absolutely. So there we are. Sohini, do you have last thoughts?
Yeah. I've had a moment to
Okay.
think about it. I would say Mahashweta's Mother of 1084 or Hajar Churashir Ma, which is fiction. But there is a good amount of Bengal in my book. And it helped me understand in particular my mother's childhood, because Hajar Churashir Ma is set in the 1970s and written in the 1970s. It also helped me understand the last chapter of my book, which is set in the 1930s, because many of the political issues that we see in the 1930s, which led to the rise of the Naxal movement, the seeds of that were sown in the in the very long 1940s, the decade that India saw so much. We see it as the decade of independence, but there was partition, there was a famine, and there was Gandhi died. So in that sense, that helped me see how, I think it helped me take a longer view of politics, and I needed that for this to be a story of India.
Thanks, Sohini. Thank you all. Thanks, Kunal. Thanks, Zeyad. Thanks, Radhika, for talking to us today on World Book Day. And to our readers, I'll just say go out and buy all of their books and please read them. Thank you.